Welcome back to the show, everybody. Today we are joined by Tony Hoffman, a man whose life story reads like a Hollywood script. From BMX prodigy to drug addict, from prison inmate to Olympic coach. Tony has experienced extreme highs and lows that most of us can only imagine. He's now an author, owner of a drug and alcohol treatment facility, and one of the world's most sought-after speakers on mental health and substance use. Tony's journey of transformation and his insights into human potential and resilience are truly extraordinary. This episode is brought to you by All Black Everything Performance Energy Drink, the official energy drink of the Athletic Fortitude podcast, available in Meijer, Walmart, and select GNC franchise locations. Are you a student athlete looking to take your game to the next level, or a parent wanting to support your young athlete's mental performance? Let me introduce you to Mettle, the ultimate mental performance coaching platform designed specifically for student athletes. Mettle combines cutting-edge AI technology with expert human coaching to help athletes build mental toughness, boost confidence, and perform under pressure. Whether you're struggling with pre-game jitters, recovering from an injury, or just want to sharpen your mental edge, Mettle has you covered. The best part, Mettle offers flexible pricing tiers to fit any budget, starting at just $49 a month. That's less than the cost of a single session with most sports psychologists. Ready to unlock your full potential? Visit mettle.coach today and use the code PODCAST for a special 10% discount on your first month. Remember, champions are made in the mind. With Mettle, you're not just playing the game, you're mastering it. With that being said, Tony Hoffman. From prison to the Olympics, how'd you make that happen?
Most of it was mindset, mindset and work. Right? Mindset work, mindset mostly centered around belief or faith that I was already there. Time just hadn't caught up yet. And so that was the beginning of me realizing, okay, I got 2 years in prison and I have to make the most out of every second that I'm here. I can't leave any stone unturned while I'm here, right? Is most people would look at 2 years and be like, oh my God, that's so much time. And my mindset had flipped from looking at how much time I had to looking at how much work I needed to do to leave prepared to make something like that happen. Because if I wasn't physically ready, if I wasn't mentally ready, or if I wasn't spiritually ready, the transition from the beginning of when I went into prison to December 13, 2008, when I paroled, it just wouldn't have been as seamless as it was. And so when I had started to cultivate at least just a belief or faith that I was going to get there and that it was going to come down to the work that I did on a daily basis. That really is what enabled me to get into the work to the level that I was getting into it while I was in prison, and just kind of focusing on, really being honest with myself about what all I was going to have to grow in, what I was going to have to develop, and what I was just going to have to prepare myself for when I got out, and then focusing solely on that regardless of what was happening in there.
Do you think if you wouldn't have gone to prison, you would have been able to make the necessary changes?
No. Me personally, no. So, I tell people prison is the Olympics of negative thinking, right? You have to think your way into prison because your thinking is what enables all the behaviors or the actions or responses that you're going to have to any situation that's happening in your life, right? And when your response is so far on the opposite spectrum of what we just watched in France, you go to a place like prison, you lose your freedom, right? You go to the Olympics as an athlete and you get to be where 1% or less than 1% of athletes ever get to be a part of something, right, of that type of sporting event. Well, when you break down the population and how many people are in prison, it's almost very similar in regards to that there's very few people that end up in prison. And you have to think and act your way into getting into prison. And for me, I needed to be completely removed from my drug addiction. My drug addiction was going to kill me. By the time I had gotten arrested and sentenced to prison, I had been sleeping on the street for like 6 months. And it wasn't fun, and it was scary. And there were many days in that time where I just, to myself, I'm like, you're going to die soon. Like, this is it, because I had tried so many different ways to get sober, and we didn't have a lot of treatment centers like we have right now. It's still hard to get into treatment centers, but it's so much easier than it was in the early 2000s when I was struggling the most. And there was really no hope left for me. So it was like I tried to get sober, but I would leave this dry out center. There was no medication to help you go through heroin withdrawals. And those withdrawals make you so impulsive because you're basically going through the worst flu times 100. And that pain can be taken away by just readmitting an opioid into your system, and then it takes away that flu. So you just become willing to do whatever it takes to stop yourself from getting dope sick, right? So I'd leave a treatment center. One time I went to Oregon, a family friend paid for me to have a bus ticket to go up there, and they said, we'll make you a manager of our ranch. They had like 200 acres of wine vineyards, and they were trying to help me get away from this black hole in addiction that I was in. And they paid for a Greyhound bus ticket, and I rode on the bus. I was high as shit. You know, I was using meth in the bathroom, using Oxycontins in the bathroom. By the time I got there, I had fallen asleep and fell out of the golf cart as we were touring the vineyards. Like if you obviously don't know, or I hope you don't know, when you've been high on meth and you've been up for several days, when you stop using meth, there's like this crash where you can't stay up and you just fall asleep because you're so high, and then there's nothing keeping you going, and then you just hit the ground, right? So Wayne is taking me around, showing me the vineyards, and he hits a corner, and I start falling asleep, and I literally just fell out of the golf cart as it was moving. And I remember he called my dad, and he was like, "What the fuck is your son on?" And that was when my dad was like, "Wayne, this is serious, and we tried to tell you this. Like, he's not smoking weed, and he's not drinking alcohol. Like, he is in deep in this stuff." So he put me down in a basement. They had this like lower house basement, and I stayed down there as I was dope sick. But day 7, I hitchhiked to the bus station, and this was like North Country or South Country, Oregon. So people are real kind, and they'll pick you up. And the guy says, "Where are you going?" I said, "I need to go to the bus station." He's like, "Well, I'll get my good deed out of the way for the day." And he takes me to the bus station. I don't got any money. I'm calling all my friends. "Let me borrow $150 so I can get back home." Nobody wants to give me $150 because they know that I need to be there, not back at home using dope, right? And so I never got any money. The bus driver goes inside the Greyhound bus station, and I sneak on the bus, 12 hours back south to Fresno, California, where I was from. Prison stopped me from being able to do that, right? As soon as I got to Wasco State Prison and they closed that cell door, it didn't pop but for 30 minutes a day for the first 90 days that I was there. And when it did pop, I couldn't leave. I was stuck on a yard. And for me personally, it saved my life because I could no longer control every decision to just flee from the location that I was from. And that was a saving grace for me. It's hard to keep people in treatment, when they're going through so many different emotions and things like that. But when you go to prison, you can't leave. And so for me, it kind of saved my life.
What do people get wrong about addiction? Like, what do we not understand?
I think the biggest one is that it's not a choice. That's the reality. Most people think, well, why don't they just stop using? Or why don't they just quit doing that and then they won't have any problems? Or let's just say you're a drinker, right? We're going to remove the crazy narcotics from the equation, and we're going to focus on something that almost everybody partakes in, alcohol. They just don't know their limits. That's what we hear. They just don't know their limits, or they don't know how to say enough is enough. Because an alcoholic or a person who's struggling with addiction with alcohol, when they start, they can't stop. And that's not actually a choice. What we've learned about the brain and the neurology and how alcohol or addiction works is it hijacks your ability to make decisions because of the swing of dopamine and the crash from the dopamine rush, or the settling of the emotions that happen with a person that's so much different than a person that's not addicted. And so the relief or the euphoric sensation that a person who becomes addicted, the relief or the euphoria that they feel is so much different than maybe somebody like yourself that can just go tonight and have a beer with their buddies, watch a football game, and go home, versus the person that is feeling such a level of relief, such a level of euphoria that when they go, they have every intention to just go have one beer with you. Or when they go play golf on the weekends or whenever they're playing, they're just going to have 3 or 4 beers. They're not going to get too crazy, but then they're that guy where you're like, yo, taking the beers out of their hand, right? Is because what's happening to them when they drink is so alluring to their brain that they can't stop. It's an obsession. And most people think it's just a choice. Well, stop. But that's not exactly how it works. And I think that's the one thing that I have spent a lot of my time over the last 17 years, 15 years as a speaker, is trying to help recalibrate people's position on what addiction really means. Because it's difficult for family members, for sons, for daughters who've watched mom and dad grow up addicted to a substance because they're missing the love, nurturing, and care or empowerment that the house is supposed to bring to that young person. And so they develop resentments and they develop their own mindset and idea about the mom or dad choosing a substance over them when that's not actually what's happening. The addiction has hijacked their brain and taken them from the things that they value the most. And they know that. They for sure know that, and they feel shame and guilt over that. And how do you get rid of the shame and guilt? You just drink more, right? Until you completely surrender to the idea that your life is unmanageable, then you never take the next step to learn to get to a place that I am with sobriety, which ultimately has a positive impact on everybody around us.
So if you don't have prison to act as your outlet to force you to stop, how do you coach people to stop with addiction?
Yeah, well, most people, here's the good thing is most people don't have to go to don't have to go to prison. Most people don't have to go to prison to surrender, and most people that go to prison don't surrender. Everybody's rock bottom is different. And this was a term that in my field of work changed over the last 20 years, 15 years, is we got into a realm of progressiveness in which they didn't like the term rock bottom. But these were people a lot of times that didn't actually live in active addiction or live the consequences of substance use issues. And so they've tried to come up with a more compassionate term or more compassionate way without understanding that your rock bottom might be losing your job. Emotionally, the guilt that you would feel from losing your job or the shame that you would feel from losing your job and the inner conversation that you would have about knowing that your drinking has caused you to lose your job or your relationship or something very surface and right in front of you, you might be like, enough's enough. That's rock bottom, bro. It's not a physical place, right? It's not in Skid Row, shooting fentanyl or smoking fentanyl and looking like a zombie. It's not sleeping on the streets or living in a trap house that's boarded up. That's not rock bottom. Some people will go there, like I went to being homeless, but that's because I was still too stubborn to recognize I have a problem, something needs to change, and the problem is me, and until I change me, the problem will exist and continue to exist for the end of time. But if you lose your job, or your girlfriend or wife leaves you, might say, I can't do this anymore. It's costing me the things that I value. And as a result of that, I will never let this do what it has been doing to me. You surrender to the idea that alcohol or drugs are some type of solution, and you make a decision that day forward that you're never going to use that as a coping skill anymore, and you're going to find out a different way to do it. And that's the open-mindedness and willingness it takes for a person to change.
The reframing of that, everybody's rock bottom is different.
Yeah.
So I can relate to that in a lot of different ways. I think in my own journey, my own story with, football and athletics, and my own version of rock bottom was not taking care of myself, basically, eating McDonald's for 3 straight weeks, having, not working out, having headaches for a month. And I just got to the point where I'd look at myself in the mirror and be like, I can't do this.
It's the same exact thing. Drugs and the consequences that come from addiction, and then somebody who had hopes, dreams, and aspirations in an area that were, with the snap of a finger, taken from them, you're experiencing grief. That's really what it is. I'm such a person who likes to focus on the emotional realm of life because we respond to things mostly based on emotions. And that's because for 21 to 25 years of our life, neurologically, our brain doesn't make decisions based on logic because it hasn't been developed enough in the prefrontal cortex. So we just make decisions based on emotions, who we're going to hang out with, what we're going to wear, the music we're going to listen to, the places that we're going to go. So we build up this habitual operation of self over time based on emotions, right? Then you get into a situation that you're in where with a snap of a finger, you lose the things you want and you're confronted with nothing but feelings. Right? The feelings of the future and how those aren't going to be what you wanted. The feelings of now, of how you're no longer in the position of the now where you had power and hope for your talent to manifest something great in the future. And that's grief because you have a loss of the future, you have a loss of the moment. And so now what do? What kind of coping skill do you deploy in the moment of feeling loss? What kind of conversation with yourself do you have during this time of uncomfortable emotions that are powered by grief, which is extremely heavy for an individual to feel? Well, like what you said, right? You just started digging a hole, right? The pity party starts. You don't know what to do. You don't know where your North Star is. You can't probably answer the three most important questions a man can answer. Who am I? What do I need? And what do I want? And if you can't answer those three questions, then you don't have a North Star. If you don't have a North Star, you don't know why you're getting up in the morning. If you don't know why you're getting up in the morning, you're not a leader. And you can't be a leader for anybody if you're not a leader for yourself. So who are you in that moment? You're nobody. And that's depressing. So then you start eating McDonald's. So then you start sacrificing your health. You start picking up drinking habits. And you start trying to find ways to instantly change the way that you feel or provide some type of relief or some type of euphoria. It may not have been through meth or heroin, but you had these other behaviors that you were trying to just manage the moment that you were living in until you finally looked in the mirror and said, this person isn't who I want to be.
How do you avoid hitting that rock bottom? Is there any way you can change human behavior before that? Or since everybody's rock bottom is different, you kind of have to wait for that moment?
I don't think you need to wait. I think you need to be a student of self.
How do you get that in younger people?
Well, it's mentorship, right? How do you get a level of skill as a football player? You know, especially in today's world, right? Like, how old are you?
I'm 28.
You're 28, bro. You grew up with YouTube.
I did.
I didn't grow up with YouTube. I grew up with Michael Jordan, Come Fly With Me, VHS. That was how we watched Michael Jordan. Other than that, we watched him live. And you didn't get enough time live, and the Come Fly With Me was really just a highlight reel of Michael Jordan's ability. Nowadays, you can watch YouTube videos over and over and over of that amazing one-handed catch, and your brain as a young person can start understanding the mechanics behind how to make something like that happen, or how to run and have a certain stride pattern or movement laterally that is efficient enough to shake a tackle but also start moving forward vertically in your step by reducing the amount of time that you're actually doing it, right? So you're limiting the ability for somebody to tackle you because your moves make the most sense. We didn't have that. So when you have the ability to study these type of things, it allows you to advance yourself so much more quickly. It's mentorship. You get a coach who knows how to do it, and they say, this is what you do. This is how you do it. Nah, you're getting it, but not quite. But it's really coaching on the internal world, right? It's how to process how you view the game, how to process the decisions that you make, and how to process the perspective that you're developing for somebody. And so I think this is where we still have so much growth to do is, right, we've really advanced in so many parts of the physical world, and we're really starting to advance in the invisible world, which are emotions. But we also live in a time where a lot of men don't want to confront that area, right? They want you to just put your head down, shut up, and get the work done. Well, that's not necessarily the way it needs to be. There can be a blend of taking younger people and coaching them up with the perspective piece, with the mental and emotional mentorship piece. Because if a person can manage their emotions, they can manage their behaviors, they control their outcomes more often than not. Because every single person listening, you yourself and me, we're sitting where we are right now because of culmination of our thinking and of the decisions that we've made over time. That's it. And so if you can mentor kids instead of letting them learn on their own, then you're probably going to develop a culture of individuals that create better outcomes over time than not.
I believe everything kind of circles back to the ability to have conversations in your head. And everything else is just a strategy or tactic to employ to get the conversations in your head in the direction that you want.
That's it.
So when it comes to managing emotions, how do you do it?
Well, the key is understanding what you just said. The word is the most important part, managing your emotions. Most people, specifically myself for sure, wanted to stop my emotions. Right? Like I hated the way I responded to certain things. Right? Like some guys I hung out with that were my friends, stuff with women didn't affect them. So then when it would affect me, it would be like, what is wrong with me? They're telling me to just get over it and to let it go, but I'm struggling to get over it. I'm struggling to let it go. I don't like the feeling of rejection. I don't like feeling this feeling of grief. I don't like this feeling of abandonment that I have. I want it to stop. Well, because I wanted it to stop, that was the problem. Instead of saying, how do I manage this emotion? One, you have to learn how to identify how you feel. If you can't identify how you feel, you'll never be able to deploy the proper coping skill to manage an emotion. The emotion will always have power over you, and the emotion will always decide what type of response you're going to have for whatever situation it is that arouses that emotion. So the first thing I say, especially for men, is we got to learn how to understand how we feel. Once we learn to understand what it is that we feel, then we make a decision on what is the skill that we're going to use when we feel this. And whatever skill that is, for myself, if I'm anxious, I'm going to the gym, bro. Right? And my dog is very similar to me. If I don't walk my dog, guess what? She starts eating shit in my house because she's getting anxious.
Right.
She's like, yo, bro, I need to get the fuck out of the house. I go walk her and she's chill. Right? It's like when I'm anxious, what works best for Tony without sacrificing the greater version of myself? Get to the gym. And not just get to the gym. You know, my big thing is a couple times a week, I try to burn 500 calories in 30 minutes. Best thing for me to do for that is to get on a spin bike and hammer out a really hard ride. When I do those types of workouts, it keeps me mentally tough, but it also keeps me emotionally balanced because it doesn't let my anxiety ride too high because neurologically I'm pounding my body into a lower state of operation, right? It's satisfying that I need to get out and do something. It's satisfying like that hunter-gatherer version of the human being that didn't have a house and a Mercedes-Benz and six figures. They had to go out and figure out what they were going to eat for the day and make sure that they were safe and they had shelter. And so you're constantly moving, you're constantly in a state of survival, and you're constantly challenging your central nervous system to do something that requires a lot of effort and a lot of focus. Well, that bike ride does that for me. And so I identify a feeling and then I plug in some type of outlet, some type of action that helps manage that experience. And then the most important thing for me is making sure that whatever that action is, it's not stopping me from feeling what I feel. It's helping alleviate that feeling without stopping it, because drugs and alcohol will stop it. Relationships can stop it. There's all types of gambling and pornography. There's all types of things that we can deploy that will stop the feeling from occurring, but it's a trick. It's a neurological trick. Each one of those activities are just a dopamine hit that when it's over, you're still handed a pile of those emotions and maybe even more because you now have guilt and shame mixed in with it.
In my own journey, I can relate so well, not necessarily to the fact of like the girls thing bothered me, but when something would bother me and not bother someone else, and I'd be like, what's wrong with me? Mm-hmm. And then people, and I, to that same extent, and as I've learned to identify my own feelings and emotions, I think back of all the times I told people, just get over it. And how bad of advice that was at that time. And I wish I could go back and remember who all I said it to and apologize. But one thing I've also noticed is the more I understand my thoughts, feelings, and emotions, the less I want to be around people who don't and won't take effort and time into understanding them. In some ways, I don't know if that's good for my own growth to kind of get with new people, but for the people who don't want to be not brought along necessarily, but focus on improvement and getting better and understanding kind of who you are, I find myself wanting to spend less time with them.
So, and I have what I believe is the definition for that, right? One of the three questions that I say that every man must be able to answer is, what do I need? You operate specifically because you're unique. And the way you feel and the way you're processing and the way that you're beginning to live your life, it requires certain types of actions, certain type of thought patterns. And those are things that you need. And so now you're removing yourself from people that don't provide what you need. And this is a selfish thing, right?
I was going to ask, is that ego or like...
No, it's saying like, this is who I am. This is what I need. And I'm going to serve these parts of me, because when I serve these parts of me, my environment, my place that I'm at in my life, it serves me. It doesn't just work for me. One of the things that I just saw from my sports psychologist who has helped me grow to the person that I am today, he said there's a difference between something working for you and something serving you.
I like that.
There's power in serving you. There's working for you it has a limit. It has a limitation, right? Because there's a ceiling to it. When it serves you, it's limitless. The power behind something that serves you is limitless. So when you get into places, environments around people, when you get around people, places, and things that serve you specifically, you become the most powerful version of yourself, right? Michael Jordan didn't train with athletes that were playing street ball in Florida. They don't serve him. Right? He stuck around people that were winners. And if you weren't quite on his level yet and you were in the vicinity of him, you knew it, because he was going to call you to a bigger position of yourself. And if you wanted to have what he had, you had to act and think the way that he did. That's all you're doing, is you're locating where your North Star is. You're putting yourself in position for you to be in a place where everything around you is serving you to the degree that you can manifest whatever it is that you want: peace, happiness, success in work, a great podcast. But if you don't have that, then you're never going to actually see it unfold, because you're just getting things to work for you versus finding a way to get around anything and everything that's actually serving you. So sure, it's hurtful maybe to some people that you're removing yourself to, but they have a fucking every ability to make the decisions that you're making too. The reality is some people just don't want to do it.
Where do you think family plays in this? What role do they play? When is it okay to leave family versus when do you think you should stick around with family?
And these are things you have to answer yourself, right? Through the work that you do on yourself. Is, what do I need? Sometimes our worst enemy is the family that brought us into this world. It's unfortunate. Sometimes the people who have no boundaries, speak to us poorly, treat us poorly. It's not the cold world that, as we become adults, we learn to know is cold and resistant. It's our family. And you have to learn within yourself, who am I? What do I need? And what do I want? And then you start to create boundaries around that. And I tell people boundaries are about two things: value and safety. Safety is an emotional place. It's not a physical place. And that is that you feel at peace, confident, and content, empowered, hopeful, more often than not. And value is, what am I worth? If you don't have a value for yourself, you'll subject yourself over and over to being mistreated because you're not quite sure what your value is. And that comes down to you not knowing who you are and what you want, right? That's why I say those three questions are the most important questions a man can answer. Because then we start to get into, how do we deploy boundaries? Well, you got to build up self-worth. And so that's the way I would see it, is that once you have that set up, then you start creating boundaries around value and safety, and you decide, you know what, I'm not going to allow my mother to do this to me anymore. I'm not going to allow my father to speak to me this way. Doesn't mean I don't love him. It doesn't mean that I won't make contact with him. I just know that I can't do the weekend barbecue. I'm going to subject myself to the Christmas dinner, the Thanksgiving dinner. And I know going into it, there may be some things that I'm not going to like, but I'll give family time on that day. Or maybe you have to make a decision that there's no more contact, right? It's not about them, it's about you. You have to live your life, and you have to be willing to make decisions that are best for you. And I think that that's a component that many people struggle with, is making a decision that's best for themselves, even if it hurts somebody else in the process. A lot of us don't want to hurt our family. We don't want to hurt our friends. So we make a decision to stay exactly where we are to protect other people. When I break that down, I just say to myself, how selfish are we to think that we're so powerful that if we make a decision that's best for us, it's going to hurt somebody else?
How do you define value? Do you believe relationships are transactional? Or where do you look for that value piece in relationships?
So I think number one is vulnerability, right? To me, relationships should be built on vulnerability. So any man that I build a friendship with has a higher understanding or a desire to have a higher understanding of self. And to have that, you have to be vulnerable about all of your thoughts and actions on a day-to-day basis, because then we can find places and ways to relate to our thought process, our perspective, and our thinking that kind of drives these responses and actions that we take on a daily basis. But we can also open up about our struggles and say, man, I'm really struggling in this area, and I can talk about the things that I have done or the things that were taught to me to help me learn to manage that experience so I could have a better outcome through the actions that I decided to take, right? And so then my relationships now are built on how engaged in themselves are they, right? Like I don't mix with men that don't know how to be a husband, right? I tell my 13-year-old stepson, just because you have a dick and you can get a girl pregnant doesn't make you a man. Just because you have a ring on your finger doesn't make you a husband, right? There's work. There's a level of work a husband has to do to keep the spark alive with their wife. The work that it takes in understanding his wife and understanding her needs, how to meet those needs, but also how to communicate to her what he needs and the boundaries that he has in his life and the things that he sees and then the compromises that get made. And so for me, I'm always looking for that. How in tune with are they with themselves? Are they willing to get vulnerable? And are they able to speak confidently that holds another man or person accountable for who they are and the actions that they take? The men that I run with now, we call each other on our shit. We're not perfect. I'm still a human being. I make dumb decisions, and so do my friends. But you know what? I also have friends that will tell me, Hoff, that was stupid, bro. You're better than that. What are you doing? Or I'll do the same thing for my friends. But I also do the same thing in my own relationship with my woman, right? We're not against having the hard conversation. And I think that that's why after 4 years, we still love each other so much we're doing the work to engage in the tough conversations and changing behaviors to meet each other's needs and saying that if we're going to commit to this over the long term, there's work for both of us. It's not just a transaction that says we're good. We don't have to do anything from here. No, it's a process, and it's a commitment over time.
Why do you think we're so fearful of having tough conversations?
I think a lot of it's childhood programming. And that's like probably a whole nother conversation in itself. But we learn how to respond and how to think according to our early childhood environment. And our family is the first form of community a person ever experiences. And so they kind of teach us how to have conversations, how to have conflict resolution, how to process emotions, what to think about yourself, what to believe about yourself, and understanding your capability in the world. And when you kind of lay those pieces out as a groundwork or framework for who you were going to be as an adult, many of us had missing components, especially your age, especially my age, especially anybody that's 45 to 50. And if you're over 50, there was very few of you that ever got sat down or shown through a family model what vulnerability, what intimacy really was, what conversation, conflict resolution actually looked like. And so I think the first one is we don't know how. The second one is nobody wants to be vulnerable and be rejected or not heard in their cry or their requests. Because where do we go from there? We get challenged. Let's just say, we'll use me and my girlfriend, for example. I have a need, And this is a serious need, right? She doesn't do this, but let's just say, she's got 3 guys that are, ex-boyfriends. They're friends now. It makes me really uncomfortable. They go to lunch, maybe a dinner randomly. They're just friends, and maybe they are just friends, but it really makes me feel uncomfortable, right? It really questions whether or not she respects me as a man. She has value for our relationship. If she's honest and loyal to the degree that she says she does, really what I'm experiencing is actions that are making me feel emasculated as a man. She's taking away my power as a man to believe that, and there's another man that holds more power over to me, that she wouldn't be focused on our relationship first. I could tell her, when you meet with these ex-boyfriends, it makes me feel that you don't respect me, or that you don't value my role in our relationship to the degree that you would sacrifice those relationships for us. And she can turn around and say, well, I don't think it's fair that you think I can't go out with them. I'm now in a very, very big position because I have a decision to make. And my decision is based on value and safety. Do I want to continue to let her do this and devalue who I am as a man? Do I want to let her continue to do this and disrupt the emotional safety of me? Because if I do, whose fault is it? It's mine. It's not her fault. I signed up for it. I knew what she was doing. She said she wasn't going to stop. She said I was insecure, which to her is her own position, and she's entitled to that. But the person that's communicating those boundaries and those needs to that person is now confronted with, do I leave this situation and find something that has better value and creates a better safety for who I am as a person? Or do I sit and engage with this and continue to let these things disrupt my emotional safety and the value I have as a man? And both have significantly different outcomes, and both are both are very big decisions to make, because not one is easy. Each one is going to have some type of grief or pain that comes with it, because leaving the situation, you're going to miss that person. Staying in the situation, you're always going to doubt, be riddled with anxiety, or have trust issues. What we have to do is figure out who we are, what we need, and what we want, and try and attach ourselves to people that when we speak up, the person looks at us and says, I never wanted to make you feel that way. I guess I didn't see that by me doing this, that you would feel devalued because I value you so much. You know what? I'm never going to do that again, because you are the person that I do value. You are the person that I have respect for, and you are the person I want to be in my life, not these guys. Bam. Now all of a sudden it's like, whoa, there's that right there, my friend, is intimacy. You were able to have a tough conversation, communicate a need. The person heard it, stepped up and said, I see you. I see your needs. I see your wants, and I value who you are, and I want to make sure that I empower that person. And when you experience that type of communication and seeing things eye to eye, there's this part of self that rises up, and you love that person even more because you start to realize they're in it for you just as much as you're in it for them. And so I think a lot of us don't want to be rejected. We don't want to be confronted with the idea, I might have to leave here. This might not actually be right for me, because a lot of times we're okay with just being comfortable. And you and I both know as athletes, comfortable is a dangerous place.
There's pain in any decision that you make. And in particular with relationships, it's funny, I've been listening to a lot of relationship talk on different podcasts, and to exasperate the issue of tough conversations is because if I have that tough conversation and she picks those other guys over me, then it's, okay, well, if I leave, then is she going to tell all of her friends and everybody that I was controlling, manipulative, whatever? What about all the things I trusted her with? Is she going to tell that to everybody? When the reality is, even if that person does do that, it's still such a small subgroup of people that will forget about it probably the second that they hear it.
Yeah.
And we create these fears and these, that's what I'm looking for, trajectories that end up not really playing out. And it's, our mind runs amok.
Sure.
And we catastrophize. And it's learning how to minimize that and put it into perspective.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I would just, the way I see it these days, go ahead and call me insecure. Call me controlling, call me whatever you want. My box looks like this. And a square peg doesn't fit in my round hole. That's it. That's it.
It's the standards you set for yourself.
Right. That's the standard I have for myself. And there are women that fit in my box. There are women who are empowered, in control, and love being inside my box. And there are women that don't. What I've had to do is learn how to recognize when a woman is not the person that's supposed to be in my box, and I do us both the favor quickly. Is I know where this is going. I'm okay with you doing all of this stuff. You can do all those things. I think they're great, but it doesn't work for me. Right? Is when a man learns to understand his emotions don't show up to the degree that he loses control of himself more often than not. Right? So while I may still struggle with certain parts of my emotion and lose control at certain times, I have the ability today to understand where things are going, why they're going, and what's actually happening to me, and how it correlates to what I actually need, so I can communicate that from a healthy position. And that healthy position is, this is what I need, this is where you're at, I love where you're at, and I think it's great, but this isn't going to work for me, because I know where this goes in the long run, and I won't subject myself to these feelings that will come up for a person who operates or has a perspective that you do. It doesn't mean that I think you're less than. It just means I know that you don't work for me. And I had that happen, I don't know, not too long ago when my girlfriend and I we had to split up for a little bit, and I tried dating, and there was a person, and she called me insecure when I told her that, it wasn't going to work for me. And I said, actually, I'm so secure, I don't even need to try to make this relationship work. And she'd never actually thought about that. She paused deeply to think, oh, maybe I have insecurity wrong, and I'm throwing it on this guy like he's supposed to be able to just control his feelings when I'm at the Soho house with some other guy, promising him that it's a friend and I'm not doing anything. That doesn't make me insecure for feeling a little uneasy or unsettled about that activity. What makes me insecure is staying in the relationship and subjecting myself to things that devalue me, make me feel unsafe, and continuing forward. What makes me secure is saying, I don't need this. I can stand by myself. I can be alone. I can feel grief, abandonment, anxiety, shame, guilt, whatever, hurt, and not have to do anything. I can let that exist in my life and make a decision that I will find something that's better fitted for me.
When do you think that talking about feelings is too much?
Well, your partner should never be your therapist, right? And I just had this conversation with somebody, I can't remember what it was, and maybe it was my social media manager, but I was like, Priscilla is not my therapist. And I don't want to make her my therapist, right? I have men for that. I have a therapist for that, right? There's some things that we don't bring to our partners because we don't want to put so much on them that they're carrying their own emotions, their own stress of life, their own discomfort of life, and then feeling like they need to carry our own, right? Because the last thing we want is to have an overly codependent partner who believes that her role or his role in life is to make sure that their partner feels good more often than not. Because then who are they forgetting about while they're trying to make the other person feel good? Themselves. So my thing is don't make your partner your therapist. Surely share your experiences, share how they're feeling, set boundaries, have tough conversations, but they shouldn't be the ones that's helping you work through your own stuff. Right? Like something happened with Priscilla and I a couple weeks ago, and I explained to her, I felt a little rejected by this, but that's a me thing. This is totally a me thing because you didn't reject me, and this isn't a form of rejection. This is me and my expectations of how I believed you should be responding to this situation according to how I would have responded. That's a me thing. So I can say I felt rejected, but I want you to know that this is a me thing and that I'm going to process this by myself. We're not going to engage in conversation to the degree that you're defending yourself or doing all of this stuff because it's a me thing. I can recognize that, this is a me thing, but I want you to know I'm having my moment right now, and this is where my moment comes from.
What do people get wrong about depression and anxiety?
Well, a lot of people don't know what anxiety is. They haven't even been able to identify it. It's people that are always tapping their feet like me when I'm sitting down.
I am.
I watch for that now, and you can kind of get the disposition of how a person is. It's a lot of times people don't realize that we're not supposed to actually just be sitting here tapping our feet like this.
Diagnose me. Why do I do that?
Right. We should be learning to take deep breaths. Instead of it being this, it should be through our breaths, because this isn't actually slowing it down or managing your anxiety. It's actually just keeping your anxiety going, right? It's a pattern of I'm anxious, I'm going to keep the anxiousness going, whereas deep breaths, studies show that 6 deep breaths in 1 minute can reduce anxiety by almost 50%. And so a lot of people don't know that anxiety exists. A lot of people don't know how anxiety is controlling them or stopping them from taking some type of action. Depression, I'm not a doctor, but I do believe that there is clinical depression, and then there is repetitive behavior that leads to depression, right? Unhealthy eating, sleeping in too much, watching or hanging out, watching stuff that's negative. If the news, you want to get depressed, just watch the news.
You're describing
every day.
When I got cut, you're describing mine was sports talk shows, which are inherently negative, but sleeping in too much, eating unhealthy, watching negative things on repeat, engaging in negative behaviors.
Yep.
I'm just fortunate if I caught mine within a month, as opposed to letting that transfer down the.
Basically, the brain is
fascinating.
It is fascinating, but think of it as just a frequency. You have an upward frequency where dopamine is released and you feel great, euphoric relief because of it. And then you have a baseline, and baseline is extremely important to me because that's who you believe you are and what it means to have nothing really happening in that moment. And then you have the downward slope. And that's when you feel discomfort. That's when you feel unmotivated. That's where confusion, guilt, grief, shame, fear all exist. When day to day is feeding the downward slope, well, then you're spending more time down here, which becomes your new baseline. So what are you doing to get yourself out of the downward slope? That's the most important question we can ask ourselves. Did I go out and get my steps in? Did I go to the gym? Did I have an empowering conversation? Did I make a decision to not listen to the music or watch the television that has been feeding the downward slope? Did I start reading more empowering books or words that make me feel good about myself? Because all of that positivity is just a vibrancy for your brain or frequency for it to shift back upward. What I want to do is raise my baseline and move it more and more up into that positive realm. So when things aren't doing good, I still have a positive baseline or a mantra that says I can, I will, and I'm able. Because that's the kind of mindset that says I'm not going to let this defeat me for extended periods of time before I take action.
I've heard that before, raise your baseline, and I think of my own life and how pretty much my entire life, and probably until the last really 3 to 5 years, I was so negative all the time. I was a pessimist about everything. And it was a lot of that came from my upbringing, certain experiences. We all see things through a certain lens. But when I started to raise my baseline of what my normal even keel positivity rate was, that's when I probably started seeing my biggest change. And then it allowed me to compound that into better behavior, better thought processes, better actions. And I think people get too focused on best. Let's do our best. It's like, well, let's raise our baseline, and that will inherently lead to just getting better and better.
Absolutely. And I also say, let's learn to understand what season we're in, because sometimes baseline is your absolute best. Sometimes you're in a downward slope. That you got to be able to roll with the punches. And we know that as athletes, right? Those are injuries, losing streaks, that idea that we have in our mind, even though everything's fine, that we're never going to make it. It's not going to work out. We're going to lose. We can't do this. You've got to be able to recognize what season you're in so you know what speed to operate at. because if you're in a downward slope, you're not sprinting. You're probably fucking crawling. But you know that if you crawl, you're going to get to where you need to go. One of the most fascinating things I ever heard was the guy that was the Navy SEAL dude that jumped off the rocks to get away from the terrorists and broke his back and his legs. The dude crawled for 13 fucking miles. He reached out, he says, drew a line, and he crawled past that line for 13 miles, bro. Most people can't walk 13 miles, right? He didn't need to run. All he needed to do, I need to just draw a line, and I need to make it 1 inch further. Over time, it turned into 13 miles, and he's still alive today to tell that story as a result of that type of courage or resilience or perseverance. When we're up, bro, that's when you sprint. You better be sprinting. That's when we're motivated, we're feeling good about everything. That's when you can take on twice the workload and freaking still do more when it's all said and done. But sometimes baseline, just doing what needs to be done is the best that you can do, and you need to recognize those seasons, because recognizing those seasons allows you to keep the right perspective for the moment, so you're not putting yourself in a position where you're going to go into a downward slope, because you're not actually supposed to be in a downward slope. Your thinking and your perspective about the situation puts you in it.
The last year and a half, I've had 4 knee surgeries. The last month, I just had another knee surgery. I had been crushing rehab. I had 3 setbacks. Popped my calf twice. Had a small procedure, but basically delayed all the progress that I had been making. And it's been basically 2 years that I've just been in pain, like some type of pain, discomfort every single day. That framework's really helpful for me. Obviously, it's not as severe as breaking my back and crawling 13 miles, but that perspective to make it that small. Don't look 3 months down the line. Look 2 steps in front of me. What can I do right now to make my knee healthier?
That's it.
And when I circled back and got back to that, even in the last week, my knee has felt so much better. And just focusing on rehab, diet, nutrition, sleep, supplements, anything that I can control and just focus on today, right now. Foam rolling, Theragun, whatever rehab exercises, and just minimizing it so unbelievably small. And then I can look back after 3 months and be like, look how far I got.
So that's the extension of how I made it to the Olympics. My baseline when I was at Wasco State Prison on D yard, cell 254, was learning how to brush my teeth every single day. That's it. Because I couldn't do that at 23 years old. After I learned how to brush my teeth, I learned how to make my bed. After I learned how to make my bed, I learned how to organize my stuff. After I learned how to organize my stuff, I learned how to be disciplined, which was my ability to do good work when I didn't want to do good work at all. And I woke up every single day. I put all of my shortcomings on the table. I put all of my requirements and priorities on the table. And I said, what can I get done today? I'm not looking to achieve the result. I'm looking to do the work. And over time, with consistent effort, the work will create a result. The result will give me something to examine, and I can change the plan and alter the work that I'm doing according to what the plan has done over time, which is nothing more than my routine. But in 2011, I had been out. I'm at the Olympic Training Center now with the top athletes in the world. Connor Fields, one of your former guests on here, was just moving into the ranks that I was at, which was the highest level of racing BMX, the AA Pro class, and I blew my knee out. I got out. I raced the 5 months after I got out of prison. December 13, 2008, I paroled in May of 2009. I raced my first professional BMX race I'd ever raced in my life. I was an amateur before, on the cover of the BMX Racing magazine in 2002. Came back to the sport at 25, so 7 years later. Didn't race an amateur race, just turned, got my pro card, showed up to the race, took 3rd place. That first year, I won 5 races in the lower pro division, earned enough money to become a AA pro. Our sport works a little bit different. You make enough money at the lower pro division, and then you get to compete with the highest level guys. So I'm now with the highest level of guys, and I make 6 finals my first year, which Connor would tell you is a big deal, especially having been where I was in the past in such little time. Most guys that turn AA pro never make a AA main event and are out of the sport within 2 years because they don't have what it takes. I make 6 finals my first year. I get invited to the Olympic Training Center, but then in October of 2011, the top American athlete for the 2012 Olympic Games in London made a mistake over a jump. We were like neck and neck, racing side by side. He made a mistake over a jump, and it caused me to put my foot out at about 30 miles an hour. Almost shattered my shin, snapped my ACL, obliterated both of my meniscuses, right? Ends my racing career. I'm 28 years old. And I'm fucking devastated, bro. Like I'm battling a lot of the stuff that you know from personal experience. Like, what's my future? What am I going to do from here? The only difference is that when I was face to face with that moment, I had this life experience that most people never get to have. And that is these years of compounded struggle, these years of confusion and just at an absolute loss for who I am and what I want. Well, I was able to answer those 3 questions while I was in prison, which allowed me to understand where north was regardless of what I was doing. You could take away my bike, you could take away my speaking career. I tell anybody, you can blow this entire building up, and if you follow me, I promise you we're going to get to somewhere good, because I know where north is for me. I know what I need to do when I get up in the morning, and I know what I want out of life, and I know what I need, so I know where to go. So when my career was basically taken from me, I was in this position where I'm going through rehab, and that, you know, the ROM machine, right? Like they put your knee in that thing that moves. Like I've got full range in 2 days. I did no pain medication when I did the ACL reconstructive surgery. Tylenol was all I used. Didn't let them give me fentanyl or Versed to knock me out. The only thing I did was anesthesia. And in fact, I tried to deny the anesthesia. And the doctor was like, I have to legally put you under. I was like, what? Just keep me up. There's got to be something you could just block the nerve and I'll just watch you do the surgery. And like the look on his face was like, this dude's fucking nuts. But I was serious, bro. And so right after this surgery, I'm focused on the comeback. Like, this is not going to be where my story ends. I'm doing this. And I was on a squat rack the following Sunday, just squatting the bar, but had full range, squatting the bar, back on a road bike within 2 weeks, and training. But the complications started around month 3, and I was supposed to be back on a bike at month 6, according to the timeline that they gave me. What ended up happening was I kept having this inflammation struggle with my IT band where it connects to the top of the knee, and the inflammation would get so bad I couldn't put any pressure on my leg, and then it would hurt like crazy. Well, I'm a sprinter, and I'm trying to torque a gear.
I'm going through something similar to that right now.
To get the bike going. Well, they would give me like these electroshock. I can't remember what it was called, but it would kill the inflammation, and they would get it down. Well, then I had a problem where I had a strain in my gastroc at the top, which also was being engaged when I would push and pull on the pedal. So I'd train for 3 months, and then I'd have to take 6 weeks off. I trained for 3 months, I'd have to take 6 weeks off. Then the atrophy in my quad never went away because I wasn't able to train consistently enough to eliminate the atrophy in my leg, which was really causing me to not have a stable compartment at the knee, which is why it was laterally moving and causing strain on that tendon. And at like 9 months, my PT guy goes, Hoff, he goes, I hate to be the one to say this. He's like, but I think you might want to, it's over. I don't think this is gonna, I don't think it's gonna work, dude. And that was a scary moment for me because I didn't know what I was gonna do. You know, I had these other things, speaking, I had the nonprofit, and I had those dreams, but they weren't producing anything. They were like in the works. But what I knew was, baseline was get out of bed, make my bed, brush my teeth, and organize my stuff. If you follow me on social media, I post a picture of my bed almost every day. The only days I don't post it is if I'm at home and my girl's still asleep. I can't post a picture of my bed made because she's still in it. I promise you the bed gets made. But if I'm on the road, I make it no matter where I'm at, in a hotel. Doesn't matter if I'm on 3 hours of sleep. I get up at 3 a.m. because that was baseline for me in prison. Make my bed, brush my teeth, organize my stuff. That was all I knew I needed to do in that moment. And that if I could just maintain baseline for this season of grief, confusion, and trying to figure out what's next would automatically come to me because movement creates opportunity. mindset recognizes opportunity to take action when it shows up. And that's what happened. I switched to coaching. At the time, I was using technology and being mentored by these really great coaches, one of them from track and field and one of them from cycling that was actually one of my coaches. So I was taking this stuff that I was learning from them and deploying it into the BMX racing field, which was very resistant to things like technology, which I laugh about it now because all the things that I was doing in 2010 and 11 and going on podcasts for track and field and talking about all the different power meters and timing systems that we were using to kind of measure fatigue and athlete readiness and deploying the right workloads to get the right results with the right rest patterns are all over BMX now. And I laugh when they're doing it because it was like, you guys made fun of me so much about using all of these pieces of equipment to extrapolate data points to understand an athlete's uniqueness and what's working and what's not working and change their training regimen based on the data points. And I got into coaching. I found some people that finally trusted and believed in me and got results. And then ultimately, basically 4 years later is when I found myself at the Olympics with Brooke Crane, my top female athlete.
Heroes and villains typically have the same origin story. It's just the actions that separate. And that's what I see with yours is you're in that hero category. Being in that crazy origin story, but being able to make the decisions to pull you out of there and to give your life purpose and meaning. I think one thing that I'm going through right now to go back to the knee, and kind of part of the reason I wear my leg sleeve, other than the fact that it makes my leg feel better, is it's really hard for me to look at my scars right now.
Yeah.
I got a big scar down my knee, have multiple here because I've had several different scopes. And it's less about the ugliness of it and more just about the constant reminder of all the shit that my leg has been through.
Mm-hmm.
And thinking about who I used to be when I could run, jump, do whatever I wanted 2 years ago. I mean, I was like just on like a training peak, and I was hitting new peaks. Even though I wasn't playing anymore, I'm like hitting new things. I'm like, all right, let's keep going. And then the knee happens, and then it keeps getting worse and worse. And I keep telling myself, kind of that story, like, no, I'm good. Like, this is it. I'm going for it. And I keep having these setbacks.
Mm.
And then it's, looking at the knee and how, particularly as an athlete, can you deal with your physical scars and your emotional scars and not let those be a hindrance to you?
I think you need to encapsulate an understanding of what it is that you're actually experiencing, which is grief. If you don't know, just Google the grief cycle. Google grief cycle diagram, and you will notice that you're still processing loss. And you're at a certain stage in that loss cycle, which is absolutely normal for every human being. So then if we know that where we're swinging downward and we're experiencing loss or grief is normal for every person, then what's the most important thing that we can do in that moment? And is to have the strong conversation with self while we're going through loss. Because you can't leave loss with a negative state of mind. You'll stay down in loss with a negative state of mind. And I could have done that with my homelessness, right? I could have done that with my drug addiction. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to look at it. I don't want to face it, because if I do, it's going to remind me of everything that I became and everything that I was and everything that I had lost and all of the potential and desires of my life when I was younger. Or I could do what I did, is recognize that it was a moment in my life that while I was going through it, didn't know where it was taking me. But when I made a decision to define who I am, what I need, and what I want, it became the very thing that gave me power. This is a moment. I'm going to give you this moment. I'm at Tehachapi State Prison. I'm training for the Olympics with snow boots, like combat boots. You get them up there in Tehachapi State Prison because it snows. And I stop. We're out in the foothills in the mountains. And I'm at a gate, chain link fence, and I'm looking out into the mountains. And I told myself, this will be one of the greatest comebacks ever. And people have no idea that right now I'm in a top secret training grounds. Every day I wake up, I only have to focus on very few things. I got a bed to sleep in, a pot to piss in. I have 3 meals 2 hots and a cold served to me every single day. It doesn't cost me any money. I don't have the cell phone. I don't have the internet. I don't have anything to distract me. All I get to do is focus on my dream and working on myself. I'm in a top secret training grounds. And the one thing that I told myself that I believe is one of the most empowering conversations I've ever had was, I will outwork every single competitor of mine because they don't know what it's like to have the pain of being homeless. I will never go back to that place. And it was so difficult for me to be in that place. That's the one thing that gives me an edge on the next person, right? That's the one thing that gives you edge on somebody else, is most people don't know what it's like to follow your dream, do all the work, and start to get to one of the places that shows you you're here. You get to touch, feel, and see and experience everything you've ever wanted since you were a little kid, and then in a snap of a finger say, no, you can't have it. The grief that comes with that, the challenge that comes with that, the adversity that comes with that, right? And when you break through the other side and you leave that grief and you leave that loss, you're going to realize that that was one of the best things that ever happened to you, because the energy that you were putting into your dream is now multiplied into whatever the next phase of your life is. Because if I can go through that, then I can go through anything. And that's it. Is recognizing where you're at, what stage or what season you're in, making a decision about the mental conversation you're going to have so you can get out to another place, and then realizing one day that sock will come off and you'll proudly show those scars, because you'll say, you know what, I had everything that I could have dreamed for, and in a moment's notice it was taken from me, but this isn't a limitation. This is a part of my story. These scars represent the war that I went through, the battles that I've won, that's gotten me to this position. And that position, you will most likely say to yourself, if you have the mindset right, the champion's mindset, right? If you have that, you will say, that was supposed to happen to me. That was what made me the special and unique and great version of who I am today, because without it, I don't know that I would have done the work that I've done on myself.
It's becoming the hero in your own story and learning how to tell that story with it.
Yeah.
Well, I can't thank you enough for coming on today, man. It's been an absolute pleasure. It's been therapeutic for me in a number of different ways. But if people want to get at you, where can they find you, and what are you doing if you want to promote anything?
Yeah, Tony M. Hoffman on Instagram, TikTok. I'm not too, I post stuff on TikTok, but I don't really interact there. But on Instagram, you can send me a DM. I have a website, TonyHoffmanSpeaking.com. I do a lot of public speaking. That's what I do 250 days a year, which is how we got into this studio here. I'm actually going to West Virginia right after this. I also own a drug and alcohol rehab facility. What I've done with my life today outside of speaking is build a location or infrastructure for people just like myself that struggle with mental health and addiction, and giving them an opportunity to rebuild their life. And one of the unique things about us is that we have a huge fitness component. Me being an athlete, my business partner being a former Ironman guy and a collegiate baseball player, it made sense for us to say, fitness is one of the best ways to trade an addiction of destruction and self-limitation for something of empowerment and feeling good about yourself. And you can find us there, phwellness.com, read all about us. And, if you follow my journey, I post a lot of content on Instagram every day. So Colin, thank you for allowing me to be here. This was actually a great conversation. I appreciate all your questions.
Nah, thank you, man. I appreciate it. And guys, check us out at athleticfortitude.com. Download the podcast, subscribe. Tune in next time, guys.
Thanks.